What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to bring you a quick tutorial on how to save a broken extension cord. So, as you can see, this extension cord has fallen victim to the lawnmower. And while most people might throw it out, we can actually save this with a few simple and easy steps. We're going to be soldering this back together and using heat shrink and then electric tape to try and save it and not throw it out. So, the tools you're going to need for this are relatively simple. You're going to need some wire strippers, soldering iron, solder, heat shrink, and a heat gun, as well as some electrical tape. Nothing too crazy. So what we're going to need to do to start is, I've already cut out the bad section here, but if you hadn't, you would need to cut this out. And then we're going to need to try and get this rather thick sheathing off of the electrical cord. There we go. And pull it off, because we need to expose these wires. Now I'm going to need to take off probably a little bit more than that so that I'm able to slide the heat shrink over each individual wire, as well as a larger heat shrink over the entire housing that houses the wires. Now the heat shrink on the outside of this is not going to be anywhere near as thick as the actual housing or rubberized housing for these wires. So what I'm going to do is use a big heat shrink, as well as I'm going to put a lot of electrical tape on this. Now obviously I still wouldn't necessarily trust it to leave it in the rain or something like that, but it's an easy way to save a decent extension cord that you can use inside in your garage, something like that, so you don't have to throw it out and buy another one. So I'm going to get all of this cleaned up and then I'll get back to you. But as you can see, basically what we're going to do is we took off that heat shrink, or not heat shrink, we took off that rubberized coating, and then each individual wire we're going to pull off the coating. But like I said, I'm going to take more off here, more off there, and once I have that done, I'll get back to you guys and show you what the next step is. Okay, so as you can see, we have got the outside coating stripped off of these, and I just want to show you guys really fast how honestly having the right tools can make a huge difference. These wire strippers are like quick wire strippers, if you want to call it that, compared to these traditional wire strippers. I don't even know how I would be able to use these on this, because the largest gauge I've got is 10, and I need to get this outside housing off. I'd probably have to try and cut it with a knife, end up cutting my fingers or something like that. Now these, I guess this is almost about the max coating you could take off, because I kind of have to shove it in here. But just to show you, you shove it in there, just squeeze, and bang, it pulls it right off. So that makes a huge difference when trying to strip wires, and you can strip wires way faster than you could with the other ones. So I would totally recommend these. So now, as you can see, we have this and the one that fell off the table. I'll grab that in a second. But before we can begin to twist these together for soldering, what we need to do is we need to get our heat shrink set up, because once we connect one of these, I'm not going to be able to put this large heat shrink over the outside of the extension cord. Now these are 100-foot rolls of heat shrink. I realize everyone may not have access to that, but if you go to your Home Depot or Lowe's, you can usually find small little individual packs of multiple sizes of heat shrink. So you could pick up just the amount you need. You'd probably find one that has like 5 pre-cut slices of this, and something that has like 5 pre-cut slices of this, and that would see you through this easily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut heat shrink, slide the large heat shrink over and down this extension cord. We're going to twist these wires together, but before we do that, we're going to put this heat shrink over here, so that once we solder this together, slide the heat shrink over, heat it up, and we're done for the most part. Then we're just going to repeat that process, heat shrink over the rest of it, and electric tape the whole thing. Okay, so to prepare your soldering connection, as you can see now, I've got the long section of heat shrink over this end, a short section that's going to cover just the wires once we solder them together. And you have to keep in mind, the reason why I had to cut back this outside cover so far is because we need to be able to slide a piece of heat shrink that's long enough to cover our wire connection here on the wires before we make the connection. Otherwise, there's no way to get the heat shrink on. So what we're going to do now is, because we have 2 stranded wires, what I like to do is you spread the wire apart. Hopefully you guys can see this. You push them in together so that they sort of become locked together, and then you're going to twist them opposite directions of each other, and that will give you a pretty solid connection. You can give it a good little tug. Don't pull it too hard because it will come out, but as you can see, putting a decent amount of pressure on that and it's not coming out. Then what I like to do to actually solder this. I got a little bit of weight on each side, because normally you might have a soldering station or something like that. I don't have anything like that. So what I do is I just put a little bit of weight on each side. That way, with the soldering iron, this isn't on yet, but you can get a little tension on here. The weight of this wire is helping, but that way you've got a good, it's not moving around, or it's like light on the tip of the soldering iron. That way you can good heat transfer, and you're going to use your solder. As the wire heats up, you'll see that the solder starts to melt back and forth. What I like to do is you just put a tiny little bit of solder on the tip, tin the soldering iron tip first, get it heating up, and then this solder with it has a flux core. It'll just sort of melt right into the wire. You don't need too much. I like to make the whole thing look pretty silver. You're going to see it change color. It changes the color of the solder, and then we're going to let it down, let it cool off, and heat shrink over the top. And that's basically it. Then we're just going to repeat the process, and we'll be back in a second. So this is my Milwaukee cordless soldering iron. I love this thing. I used to use this cheap little soldering iron from Home Depot. Still a great tool to have, but it's corded, and that has its limitations sometimes. With this thing, it's awesome. It heats up in about 10 seconds, runs off your M12 batteries. No complaints, love it. Also, they were pretty smart when they designed this. It has somewhat of a, I don't know, an octagonal, hexagonal shape, so that when you put it down, even no matter which way it rolls, it doesn't let your soldering iron tip touch stuff if you like to lay it down flat. Now, you do have the ability also to change the angle you're working at. I like to work with it straight. It has a battery indicator. Green is to show you that the tip is now hot and ready to go, and when you turn it off, it's red to warn you that the tip is still hot, and that will shut off after about 30-35 seconds, and it'll be about cool to the touch. It might be a little warm, but it's not going to burn you in any capacity. So we flip it on. We've got two left. We're green again, so that means we're good to go. So I'm going to get some solder on the tip of this thing. There you can go. See, just a little bit, all you need, and then we are going to get to work on this wire. So we've got the wire on the tip of the soldering iron, waiting for it to heat up. This is definitely a little bit thicker wire, so it might take a minute before you can get the solder going. But as long as you've got a good connection, it'll start. And there we go. Once it starts, then you're good. Just keep running. We're gonna get this whole thing. You might have to move just a little bit, based off of how long this section is. Otherwise, you might have to you'd be holding your soldering iron there for a long time. But as you can see here, just gonna kind of almost paint the wire with the solder, and then before we set it down on something like plastic, we should have enough space. That is gonna sit there. Now, what I just noticed, and this can happen because we're applying so much heat there, it started to cause the heat shrink to shrink. This isn't the end of the world. What we're gonna have to do is we're gonna take a knife or something, make a little cut there, and luckily this piece of heat shrink is long enough that we'll be able to take the remaining section and slide it over. That's just something to think about, and as you're heating this part, the heat does start to travel through the wire, so that's what happened there, but it's not the end of the world. Alright, so we are on our last step. All three connections are made inside. Heat shrink over each, and then I slid the big section of heat shrink over the top of this. We're going to heat it up, and that's going to be it. Then we'll test this. I'm also, like I said, I'm going to tape this whole thing just as an extra measure of security, because the heat shrink is nowhere near as thick as this outside, so I'll make it a little beefier with some electric tape, and we'll be good to go. But thanks for watching. Hopefully this helped you if you're in a similar situation. If you have any questions, feel free to comment, and I'll try my best to get back to you. Thanks.